Later on, as the Prophet said, if any one of you feels drowsy while praying, he should sleep till he understands what he is saying. Anas said the Prophet used to perform ablution for every prayer. I asked Anas, what did you used to do? Anas replied, we used to pray with the same ablution until we break it. In the year of the conquest of Khaybar, I went with Allah's Messenger till we reached As-Sahba, where Allah's Messenger led the Asr prayer and asked for food. Nothing but sawik was brought, and we ate it and drank water. The Prophet got up for the Maghrib prayer, rinsed his mouth with water, and then led the prayer without repeating the ablution. Narrated Ibn Abbas, once the Prophet, while passing through one of the graveyards of Medina or Mecca, heard the voice of two persons who were being tortured in their graves. The Prophet said, these two persons are being tortured not for a major sin to avoid. The Prophet then added, yes, they are being tortured for a major sin. Indeed, one of them never saved himself from being soiled with his urine, while the other used to go about with calumnies to make enmity between friends. The Prophet then asked for a green leaf of a date palm tree, broke it into two pieces, and put one on each grave. On being asked why he had done so, he replied, I hope that their torture might be lessened till these get dried. Narrated Anas bin Malik, whenever the Prophet went to answer the call of nature, I used to bring water with which he used to clean his private parts. Narrated Ibn Abbas, the Prophet once passed by two graves, and said, these two persons are being tortured, not for a major sin to avoid. One of them never saved himself from being soiled with his urine, while the other used to go about with calumnies to make enmity between friends. The Prophet then took a green leaf of a date palm tree, split it into pieces, and fixed one on each grave. They said, O Allah's Apostle, why have you done so? He replied, I hope that their punishment might be lessened till the pieces of the leaf become dry. Narrated Anas bin Malik, the Prophet saw a Bedouin making water in the mosque and told the people not to disturb him. When he finished, the Prophet asked for some water and poured it over the urine. Narrated Abu Huraira, a Bedouin stood up and started making water in the mosque. The people caught him, but the Prophet ordered them to leave him and to pour a bucket or a tumbler of water over the place where he'd passed the urine. The Prophet then said, you have been sent to make things easy, not to make them difficult. A Bedouin came and passed urine in one corner of the mosque. The people shouted at him, but the Prophet stopped them till he finished urinating. The Prophet ordered them to spill a bucket of water over that place, and they did so. The mother of faithful believers. A child was brought to Allah's Messenger, and it urinated on the garment of the Prophet. The Prophet asked for water and poured it over the soiled place. I brought my young son, who had not started eating ordinary food, to Allah's Messenger, who took him and made him sit on his lap. The child urinated on the garment of the Prophet, so he asked for water and poured it over the soiled area, and did not wash it. Once the Prophet went to the dumps of some people and passed urine while standing. He then asked for water, and so I brought it to him, and he performed ablution. Narrated Huzaifa, the Prophet and I walked till we reached the dumps of some people. He stood as any of you stands behind a wall and urinated. I went away, but he beckoned me to come, so I approached him and stood near his back till he finished. Narrated Abu Wail. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari used to lay great stress on the question of urination, and he used to say, if anyone from Bani Israel happened to soil his clothes with urine, he used to cut that portion away. Hearing that, Hudhayfa said to Abu Wail, I wish he, Abu Musa, didn't lay great stress on that matter. Hudhayfa added, Allah's Messenger went to the dumps of some people and urinated while standing. Narrated Asma. A woman came to the Prophet and said, if any one of us gets menses in her clothes, then what should she do? He replied, she should take hold of the soiled place, rub it and put it in water, and rub it in order to remove the traces of blood, and then pour water over it. Then she can pray in it. Narrated Aisha. Fatima bint Abi Hubaysh came to the Prophet and said, O Allah's Messenger, I get persistent bleeding from the uterus and do not become clean. Shall I give up my prayers? Allah's Messenger replied, no, because it is from a blood vessel and not the menses. So when your real menses begins, give up your prayers, and when it has finished, wash off the blood, take a bath, and offer your prayers. Hisham the sub-narrator narrated that his father had also said the Prophet told her, perform ablution for every prayer till the time of the next period comes. Narrated Aisha, I used to wash the traces of Janaba semen from the clothes of the Prophet, and he used to go for prayers while traces of water were still on it, water spots were still visible. Narrated Sulaiman bin Yasar, I asked Aisha about the clothes soiled with semen. She replied, I used to wash it off the clothes of Allah's Messenger, and he would go for prayer while water spots were still visible. Narrated Abu Qilaba. Anas said some people of Ukul or Uraina tribe came to Medina, and its climate did not suit them. So the Prophet ordered them to go to a herd of milch camels, and to drink their milk and urine as a medicine. So they went as directed, and after they became healthy, they killed the shepherd of the Prophet, and drove away all the camels. The news reached the Prophet early in the morning, and he sent men in their pursuit, and they were captured and brought at noon. He then ordered to cut their hands and feet, and it was done, and their eyes were branded with heated pieces of iron. They were put in al-Harra, and when they asked for water, no water was given to them. Abu Qilaba said, those people committed theft and murder, became infidels after embracing Islam, and fought against Allah and His Apostle. Narrated Anas, prior to the construction of the mosque, the Prophet offered prayers at sheepfolds. Narrated Maimuna, Allah's Messenger, was asked regarding ghee, cooking butter, in which a mouse had fallen. He said, take out the mouse and throw away the ghee around it and use the rest. Narrated Abu Huraira, the Prophet said, a wound which a Muslim receives in Allah's cause will appear on the day of resurrection as it was at the time of infliction. Blood will be flowing from the wound, and its colour will be that of the blood, but will smell like musk. We Muslims are the last people to come in the world, but will be the foremost on the day of resurrection. You should not pass urine in stagnant water which is not flowing, then you may need to wash in it. Narrated Abdullah, while Allah's Messenger was prostrating. Narrated Abdullah bin Masud, once the Prophet was offering prayers at the Kaaba. Abu Jahl was sitting with some of his companions. One of them said to the others, who amongst you will bring the abdominal contents, intestines, etc., of a camel of Bani so-and-so, and put it on the back of Muhammad when he prostrates? The most unfortunate of them got up and brought it. He waited till the Prophet, peace be upon him, prostrated, and then placed it on his back between his shoulders. I was watching, but could not do anything. I wish I had some people with me to hold out against them. They started laughing and falling on one another. Allah's Messenger was in prostration, and he did not lift his head up till Fatima, Prophet's daughter, came and threw that camel's abdominal contents away from his back. He raised his head and said thrice, O Allah, punish Quraysh. So it was hard for Abu Jahl and his companions when the Prophet invoked Allah against them, as they had a conviction that the prayers and invocations were accepted in the city of Mecca. The Prophet said, O Allah, punish Abu Jahl, Utbah bin Rabi'ah, Shaiba bin Rabi'ah, Al-Walid bin Utbah, Umayyah bin Khalaf, and Uqbah bin al-Mu'ayt. And he mentioned the seventh, whose name I cannot recall. By Allah, in whose hands my life is, I saw the dead bodies of those persons who were counted by Allah's Messenger in the Qalib, one of the wells of Badr, Battle of Badr. Narrated Anas, the Prophet once spat in his clothes. Narrated Aisha, the Prophet said, all drinks that produce intoxication are haram, forbidden to drink. Narrated Abu Hazim, Sahal bin Sa'd as-Sa'idi was asked by the people, with what was the wound of the Prophet treated? Sahal replied, none remains among the living who knows that better than I. Ali used to bring water in his shield, and Fatima used to wash the blood off his face. Then straw mat was burnt, and the wound was filled with it. My father said, I came to the Prophet, and saw him carrying a siwak in his hand, and cleansing his teeth, saying ooh, as if he was retching, while the siwak was in his mouth. Narrated Huzaifa, whenever the Prophet got up at night, he used to clean his mouth with siwak. Narrated Ibn Omar, the Prophet said, I dreamt that I was cleaning my teeth with a siwak, and two persons came to me. One of them was older than the other, and I gave the siwak to the younger. I was told that I should give it to the older, and so I did. The Prophet, narrated Al-Bara bin Azib, the Prophet said to me, whenever you go to bed, perform ablution like that for the prayer. Lie on your right side, and say, Allah, I surrender to you, and entrust all my affairs to you, and depend on you for your blessings, both with hope and fear of you. There is no fleeing from you, and there is no place of protection and safety except with you. Wallah, I believe in your book, the Quran, which you have revealed, and in your Prophet Muhammad, whom you have sent. Then if you die on that very night, you would die with faith, i.e. the religion of Islam. Let the aforesaid words be your last utterance before sleep. I repeated it before the Prophet, and when I reached Allahumma amantu bi kitabika alladhi anzalta, O Allah, I believe in your book which you have reached. I said, Wa Rasulika, and you passed. Oh, the Prophet said, no, but say, Wa Nabiyika alladhi arsalta, your Prophet whom you have sent instead. Narrated Aisha, whenever the Prophet took a bath after Janaba, he started by washing his hands and then performed ablution, like that for the prayer. After that, he would put his fingers in water and move the roots of his hair with them, and then pour 3 handfuls of water over his head, and then pour water all over his body. Narrated Maimuna, the wife of the Prophet, Allah's Messenger, performed ablution like that for the prayer, but did not wash his feet. He washed off the discharge from his private parts and then poured water over his body. He withdrew his feet from that place, the place where he took the bath, and then washed them, and that was his way of taking the bath of Janaba. The Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot called Faraq. Narrated Abu Salama. Aisha's brother and I went to Aisha, and he asked her about the bath of the Prophet. She brought a pot containing about a sa' of water and took a bath and poured it over her head, and at that time there was a screen between her and us. Narrated Abu Jafar. Narrated Abu Ja'far. While I and my father were with Jabir bin Abdullah, some people asked him about taking a bath. He replied, "A sa' of water is sufficient for you." A man said, "A sa' is not sufficient for me." Jabir said, "A sa' was sufficient for one who had more hair than you, and was better than you," meaning the Prophet. And then Jabir put on his garment and led the prayer. The Prophet and Maimuna used to take a bath from a single pot. Allah's Messenger said, "As for me, I pour water 3 times on my head," and he pointed with both his hands. Narrated Abu Jafar. Jabir bin Abdullah said to me, "Your cousin Hassan bin Muhammad bin al-Hanafiya came to me and asked about the bath of Janaba." I replied, "The Prophet uses to take 3 handfuls of water, pour them on his head, and then pour more water over his body." Al-Hassan said to me, "I am a hairy man." I replied, "The Prophet had more hair than you." Narrated Maimuna. I placed water for the bath of the Prophet. He washed his hands twice or thrice, and then poured water on his left hand and washed his private parts. He rubbed his hands over the earth and cleaned them, rinsed his mouth, washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing out, washed his face and both forearms, and then poured water over his body. Then he withdrew from that place and washed his feet. Whenever the Prophet took the bath of Janaba, sexual relation, or wet dream, he asked for the hilab, or some other scent. He used to take it in his hand, rub it first over the right side of his head, and then over the left, and then rub the middle of his head with both hands. The Prophet took the bath of Janaba. He first cleaned his private parts with his hand, and then rubbed that hand on the wall, earth, and washed it. Then he performed ablution like that for the prayer, and after the bath, he washed his feet. I placed water for the bath of Allah's Messenger, and he poured water over his hands and washed them twice or thrice. Then he poured water with his right hand over his left and washed his private parts with his left hand. He rubbed his hand over the earth and rinsed his mouth, and washed his nose by putting water in it and blowing out. After that he washed his face, both forearms, and head thrice, and then poured water over his body. He withdrew from that place and washed his feet. I presented him with a piece of cloth towel, and he pointed with his hand that he does not want it, and did not take it. On the authority of his father, that he had asked Aisha about the hadith of Ibn Umar. She said, "May Allah be merciful to Abu Abdurrahman. I used to put scent on Allah's Messenger, and he used to go round his wives, and in the morning he assumed the ihram, and the fragrance of scent was still coming out from his body." Narrated Qatada. Anas bin Malik said the Prophet used to visit all his wives in a round during the day and night, and there were 11 in number. I asked Anas, had the Prophet the strength for it? Anas replied, "We used to say that the Prophet was given the strength of 30 men." And Said said on the authority of Qatada that Anas had told him about 9 wives only, not 11. Narrated Ali. I used to get emotional urethral discharge frequently. Being the son-in-law of the Prophet, I requested a man to ask him about it. So the man asked the Prophet about it. The Prophet replied, "Perform ablution after washing your organ." Narrated Abu Huraira. Once the call, Iqama, for the prayer was announced, and the rows were straightened. Allah's Messenger came out, and when he stood up at his musalla, he remembered that he was junub. Then he ordered us to stay at our places, and went to take a bath, and then returned with water dropping from his head. He said, "Allahu Akbar," and we all offered the prayer with him. Narrated Maimuna, I screened the Prophet while he was taking a bath of Janaba. He washed his hands, poured water from his right hand over his left, and washed his private parts. Then he rubbed his hand over a wall or the earth and performed ablution similar to that for the prayer, but did not wash his feet. Then he poured water over his body, shifted from that place, and washed his feet. Narrated Salama, the mother of the believers, Salam, the wife of Abu Talha, came to Allah's Messenger and said, O Allah's Messenger, verily Allah is not shy of telling you the truth. Is it necessary for a woman to take a bath after she has a wet dream, nocturnal sexual discharge? Allah's Messenger replied, yes, if she notices a discharge. Narrated Abu Hurairah, the Prophet came across me in one of the streets of Medina, and at that time I was junub, so I slipped away from him and went to take a bath. On my return, the Prophet said, Abu Hurairah, where have you been? I replied I was junub, so I disliked to sit in your company. The Prophet said, Subhanallah, a believer never becomes impure. Narrated Abu Salama, I asked Aisha, did the Prophet used to sleep while he was junub? She replied yes, but he used to perform ablution before going to bed. Narrated Umar bin al-Khattab, I asked Allah's Messenger, can any one of us sleep while he is junub? He replied yes, if he performs ablution he can sleep while he is junub. Narrated Aisha, whenever the Prophet intended to sleep while he was junub, he used to wash his private parts and perform ablution like that for the prayer. Umar bin al-Khattab told Allah's Messenger, I became junub at night. Allah's Messenger replied, perform ablution after washing your private parts and then sleep. The Prophet said, when a man sits in between the four parts of a woman and did the sexual intercourse with her, bath becomes compulsory. I asked Uthman bin Affan about a man who engaged in sexual intercourse with his wife but did not discharge. Uthman replied, he should perform ablution like that for the prayer after washing his private parts. Uthman added, I heard that from Allah's Messenger. I asked Ali bin Abi Talib, Az-Zubayr bin al-Awam, Talha bin Ubaidullah and Ubay bin Ka'b, and they gave the same reply. Abu Ayyub said that he had heard that from Allah's Messenger. The order was cancelled later on, so one has to take a bath. I asked Allah's Messenger about a man who engages in sexual intercourse with his wife but does not discharge. He replied, he should wash the parts which comes into contact with the private parts of the woman, perform ablution, and then pray. Abu Abdullah said, taking a bath is safer and is the last order. Narrated Al-Qasim, Aisha said we set out with the sole intention of performing Hajj, and when we reached Sarif, a place 6 miles from Mecca, I got my menses. Allah's Messenger came to me while I was weeping. He said, what is the matter with you? Have you got your menses? I replied yes. He said, this is a thing which Allah has ordained for the daughters of Adam. So do what all pilgrims do, with the exception of the tawaf, circumambulation round the Kaaba. Aisha added, Allah's Messenger sacrificed cows on behalf of his wife. Narrated Aisha, while in menses, I used to comb the hair of Allah's Messenger. Narrated Urwa, a person asked me, can a woman in menses serve me? And can a junub woman come close to me? I replied, all this is easy for me. All of them can serve me, and there is no harm for any other person to do the same. Aisha told me that she used to comb the hair of Allah's Messenger while she was in her menses, and he was in itikaf in the mosque. He would bring his head near her in her room, and she would comb his hair while she used to be in her menses. The Prophet used to lean on my lap and recite Quran while I was in my menses, narrated Aisha. Narrated Salama, while I was laying with the Prophet under a single woolen sheet, I got the menses. I slipped away and put on the clothes for menses. He said, have you got nifas, menses? I replied yes. He then called me and made me lie with him under the same sheet. Narrated Aisha, the Prophet and I used to take a bath from a single pot while we were junub. During the menses, he used to order me to put on izar, dress worn below the waist, and then used to fondle me while in itikaf. He used to bring his head near me, and I would wash it while I used to be in my periods, menses. Narrated Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, once Allah's Messenger went out to the Musalla to offer the prayer of Eid al-Adha or al-Fitr prayer. Then he passed by the women and said, O women, give alms, as I have seen that the majority of the dwellers of hellfire were you. They asked, why is it so, O Allah's Messenger? He replied, you curse frequently and are ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. A cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you. The woman asked, O Allah's Messenger, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion? He said, is not the evidence of two women equal to the witness of one man? They replied in the affirmative. He said, this is the deficiency in her intelligence. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses? The woman replied in the affirmative. He said, this is the deficiency in her religion. We were forbidden to mourn for a dead person for more than 3 days, except in the case of a husband, for whom mourning was allowed for 4 months and 10 days. During that time, they were not allowed to put kohol, antimony, eye powder in our eyes, or to use perfumes, or to put on coloured clothes, except a dress made of asar, a kind of Yemen cloth, very coarse and rough. We were allowed very light perfumes at the time of taking a bath, after menses, and also we were forbidden to go with the funeral procession. Narrated Aisha, a woman asked the Prophet about the bath which is taken after finishing from the menses. The Prophet told her what to do, and said, "Purify yourself with a piece of cloth scented with musk." The woman asked, "How shall I purify myself with it?" He said, "Subhanallah, purify yourself with it." I pulled her to myself, and said, "Rub the place soiled with blood with it." Narrated Aisha, an Ansari woman asked the Prophet how to take a bath after finishing from the menses. He replied, "Take a piece of cloth perfumed with musk, and clean the private parts with it thrice." The Prophet felt shy and turned his face, so I pulled her to me and told her what the Prophet meant. Narrated Aisha, in the last Hajj of Allah's Messenger, I assumed the ihram for Hajj along with Allah's Apostle. I was one of those who intended tamattu, to perform Hajj and Umrah, and did not take the hadi animal for sacrifice with me. I got my menses and was not clean till the night of Arafah. I said, "O Allah's Apostle, it is the night of the day of Arafah, and I intended to perform the Hajj tamattu with Umrah." Allah's Messenger told me to undo my hair and comb it, and to postpone the Umrah. I did the same and completed the Hajj. On the night of Al-Hasba, i.e. place outside Mecca, where the pilgrims go after finishing all the ceremonies of Hajj, at Mina, he, the Prophet, ordered Abdurrahman, Aisha's brother, to take me to At-Tan him to assume the ihram for Umrah in lieu of Hajj at-Tamattu, which I had intended to perform. The Prophet said, "At every womb Allah appoints an angel who says, 'O Lord, a drop of semen, O Lord, a clot, O Lord, a little lump of flesh.' Then if Allah wishes to complete its creation, the angels ask, 'O Lord, will it be a male or a female, a wretched or a blessed? And how much will his provision be? And what will his age be?' So all that is written while the child is still in the mother's womb." Narrated Urwa, Aisha said, "We set out with the Prophet in his last Hajj. Some of us intended to perform Umrah while of his Hajj. When we reached Mecca, Allah's Messenger said, 'Those who had assumed the ihram for Umrah had not bought the hadi should finish the ihram, and whoever had assumed the ihram for Umrah and brought the hadi should not finish the ihram till he has slaughtered his hadi, and whoever had assumed the ihram for Hajj should complete his Hajj.'" Aisha further said, "I got my period menses and kept on menstruating till the day of Arafah." Narrated Mu'adha, a woman asked Aisha, "Should I offer the prayers that which I did not offer because of menses?" Aisha said, "Are you from the Haraura, a town in Iraq? We were with the Prophet and used to get our periods, but he never ordered us to offer them the prayers missed during menses." Aisha perhaps said, "We did not offer them." Irritated Ayub. Hafsa said, "We used to forbid our young women to go out for the two Eid prayers. A woman came and stayed at the palace of Bani Khalaf, and she narrated about her sister, whose husband took part in 12 holy battles along with the Prophet, and her sister was with her husband in 6 out of these 12. She, the woman's sister, said, "We used to treat the wound, looking after the patients, and once I asked the Prophet, is there any harm for any of us to stay at home if she doesn't have a veil? He said she should cover herself with the veil of her companion and should participate in the good deeds and the religious gatherings of the Muslims." When Atiyah came, I asked her whether she had heard it from the Prophet. She replied, "Yes, may my father be sacrificed for him." Whenever she mentioned the Prophet, she used to say, may my father be sacrificed for him. I have heard the Prophet saying, "The unmarried young virgins and the mature girl who stay often screened, or the young unmarried virgins who often stay screened, and the menstruating woman should come out and participate in the good deeds as well as the religious gatherings of the faithful believers, but the menstruating woman should keep away from the musalla praying place." Hafsa asked Atiyah surprisingly, "Do you say the menstruating woman?" She replied, "Doesn't a menstruating woman attend Arafah Hajj and such other deeds?" "We never considered yellowish discharge as a thing of importance as menses," narrated Atiyah. Narrated Aisha, the wife of the Prophet Habiba, got bleeding in between the periods for 7 years. She asked Allah's Messenger about it. He ordered her to take a bath after the termination of actual periods, and added that it was from a blood vessel, so she used to take a bath for every prayer. Narrated Aisha, the wife of the Prophet. We set out with Allah's Messenger on one of his journeys till we reached Al-Baida or Datul Jaish. A necklace of mine was broken and lost. Allah's Messenger stayed there to search for it, and so did the people along with him. There was no water in that place, so the people went to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and said, "Don't you see what Aisha has done? She has made Allah's apostle and the people stay there where there is no water, and they have no water with them." Abu Bakr came while Allah's Messenger was sleeping with his head on my thigh. He said to me, "You have detained Allah's Messenger and the people where there is no water, and they have no water with them." So he admonished me and said what Allah wished him to say, and hit me on my flank with his hand. Nothing prevented me from moving because of pain, but the position of Allah's Messenger on my thigh. Allah's Messenger got up when dawn broke, and there was no water, so Allah revealed the divine verses of Tayammum. So they all performed Tayammum. Usaid bin Hudayr said, "O the family of Abu Bakr, this is not the first blessing of yours. when the camel on which I was riding was caused to move from its place, and the necklace was found beneath it.